The war between Russia and Ukraine, the military conflict between Israel and Palestine. Throughout history, from World Wars I and II to the Gulf War, propaganda has been used repeatedly to incite war around the world. How do the state authorities gain support for war from their people? What role does the media play in war? War propaganda, it swallows us up without being realized. Let us take a closer look at the reality of this situation. Hello everyone, I'm Kanta. I received some feedback on the video I uploaded last time. In the last video, I explained the first half of the war propaganda. This video is a continuation of the last one. Let's look at the second half, the war propaganda, after the fifth principle and beyond. Before getting into the fifth principle, let us briefly review the outline of war propaganda. There are common principles in war propaganda. A famous study points that out. Arthur Ponsonby, a British politician. In his book, Falsehood in Wartime, he exposed that the British government during World War I succeeded in attracting large numbers of volunteer soldiers by creating lies to incite fear and hatred in the public and to drive patriotism. Ponsonby identified 10 common elements as the laws of war propaganda. At the time, these laws he pointed out had World War I in mind, but it was later revealed by Belgian historian Anne Morelli that Ponsonby's 10 laws also applied to other periods and other wars. In her book, The Basic Principles of War Propaganda, Anne Morelli revealed the mechanisms by which war propaganda had been created and used by a number of countries to legitimize their entry into war, ranging from World War I to the wars in the present day. In the previous video, I explained the first through the fourth principles. I'll recap the contents in digest form. The first principle, we do not want war. By demonstrating their desire for peace, they try to soften the public's opposition to war and win the support of the people. The second principle, our adversary is solely responsible for this war. They insist that their actions are only for self-defense, and they are compelled to start a war because the other side is posing a danger. The third principle, our adversary's leader is inherently evil and resembles the devil. By giving the enemy an easily recognizable face and making that person into a symbolic villain, a concrete image of the enemy camp is presented to their own people. The fourth principle, we are defending a noble cause, not our particular interests. Attempts are made to gain public approval for the war by masking the true purposes for starting it and replacing them with a cause such as noble justice or the Great Commission. Again referring to Anne Morelli's book, The Basic Principles of War Propaganda, I will explain the fifth and subsequent principles of war propaganda used to gain public support in the continuing stages of war. The fifth principle of war propaganda is, the enemy is purposefully committing atrocities. If we are making mistakes, this happens without intention. Once the propaganda to start a war is in place up to the fourth principle, the fifth and subsequent principles become the means to further consolidate public support as the war continues. It is at this stage that the state attempts to reassure the public that its actions are justified and to deliberately create an image of increased hatred toward the enemy. This principle was symbolized by the event known as Naira's testimony, in which Naira, a young girl from Kuwait, tearfully recounted her testimony during the 1991 Gulf War that Iraqi soldiers had invaded a hospital, pulled a baby out of an incubator, and killed that baby. This testimony was spread throughout the world's media, generating intense condemnation of the Iraqi military and strong support for the war. However, it was later discovered that this story was fabricated and that no such acts had actually taken place. Naira's testimony was part of a propaganda effort used to give the impression that the enemy had deliberately committed atrocities. An advertising agency was involved in the background. While atrocities do indeed occur in war, propaganda minimizes the sacrifices made by one's own troops as unintentional mishap, and the emphasis is placed only on the fact that the enemy side intentionally commits atrocities. For example, during the Gulf War, the image of a clean war was promoted as if the casualties caused by the US-led multinational force were minimal, while the atrocities of the Iraqi army were emphasized. The sixth principle of war propaganda is, the enemy makes use of illegal weapons. This principle serves to further concretize the image implanted in the third principle, that the enemy's leaders are demonic. It amplifies public hatred by making people believe that the enemy is ignoring the normal rules of war and using more brutal and inhumane methods. For example, poison gas was used in World War I. The countries that participated in the war emphasized their own damage by claiming to each other that it was the other side that used poison gas first. This promoted the image that the enemy was an entity that used inhumane tactics. In addition, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in World War II was criticized as a sneak attack, but the Japanese viewed it as a strategic surprise. Distinctions between sneak weapon and legitimate strategy is itself created by propaganda during wartime. Propaganda emphasizes that only the enemy is using atrocious means, thereby making it easier to justify one's own actions as noble warfare. This creates a stronger impression that justice in war lies solely with one's own country. The seventh principle of war propaganda is, we suffer few losses. The enemy's losses are considerable. Even if the propaganda to start a war is successful, continuous loss of lives of soldiers of one's own country can lead to anti-war movements and demoralization in that country. Moreover, even if the fifth and sixth principles are used to incite hostility against the enemy, public support for the war may waver if the people feel that their country is in distress. Therefore, in the seventh principle, the damage to one's own country is understated and the damage to the enemy exaggerated in order to make the war situation appear favorable. This gives the public the impression that we have the upper hand, and the war is progressing smoothly with the aim of maintaining support for the war. For example, in Japan during the Pacific War, relatively accurate information was released at the beginning of the war. However, as the war situation became unfavorable, war results became overstated, and damage to their own country covered up. This is the type of information manipulation known as announcement by the Imperial General Headquarters. Domestically, the impression that we are winning was widespread, and support for the war was maintained. Information manipulation serves as an important propaganda tool in wartime. In addition to what to tell, the decision of what not to tell has a great influence on the manipulation of public consciousness. The eighth principle of war propaganda is, recognized intellectuals and artists support our cause. Once public approval for the war has been obtained by principles up to the seventh, the next step is to form an overwhelming public opinion. From this point forward, war propaganda enters the mop-up stage. In the fourth principle, the leader of the nation proclaims the lofty principle, we fight for a great mission, but this alone may gradually turn off the public. Therefore, by enlisting the support of artists and intellectuals, an atmosphere is created that the war is widely supported by society as a whole. It is important to note that artists and intellectuals are not mere celebrities, but professionals who create emotion and empathy. They play an enormous role because they deepen support for the war not only through logic and facts, but also through emotional mobilization. During World War I, for example, writers and poets glorified the just war, and through their patriotic works they stirred up public emotions and strengthened support for the war. As Arthur Ponsonby pointed out, artists and intellectuals in European countries at the time were all glorifying war in order to inspire the public's will to fight. In the modern era, advertising agencies appear as a means of creating excitement. It was Hill and Knowlton, one of the world's 3 largest PR firms, that scripted Nayara's testimony during the Gulf War. The testimony was widely circulated in the media as a symbol of the brutality of the Iraqi army and strongly implanted in many people's minds the impression of a just war. Today, it is not only the military industry that profits from war. PR firms such as advertising agencies also profit greatly from their involvement in war propaganda. War is a big business. In this age of social media power, instead of artists, intellectuals, and advertising agencies, influencers could be used as propaganda personnel. Or it may be that they are already used. The ninth principle of war propaganda is, our cause is sacred. The word sacred here has, first of all, a literal religious meaning. In other words, it gives the public the impression that our war is a holy war supported by God. By using the absolute value of God, the war is accepted as righteousness, without causing doubts. For example, during the Pacific War, Japan carried out war in the name of the emperor. Also, the word kami, in Japanese, or God, was used for kamikaze suicide squads, indicating the sacred meaning attached to the self-sacrificing actions in attacking the enemy. In this way, by speaking of war as sacred, the public is instilled with a sense of absolute value that cannot be violated by anyone, and an atmosphere is created in which war cannot be opposed. In the modern era, although religious elements are not always used, democracy, freedom, human rights, and the free market economy are often spoken of as sacred causes. For example, the war on terror or the war against terrorism emphasize the cause of protecting freedom and democracy. In any case, by upholding absolute values that no one can oppose, an atmosphere is created in which war is difficult to criticize. Thus, when the cause of war is perceived as sacred and absolute values, the public is more likely to accept it without question, leading to the formation of overwhelming public opinion. Once the overwhelming public opinion in favor of war has been formed under the principles up to the 9th, the only remaining piece is the final, all-encompassing process. The 10th principle of war propaganda is, whoever casts doubt on our propaganda helps the enemy and is a traitor. By creating excitement with the help of artists, intellectuals, and advertising agencies, and by further sanctifying the cause of war, public support for the war must have already become solid. In the final stage of war propaganda, anyone who questions this justice is considered a traitor, and a situation is created in which dissent is completely shut down. During World War II, those in the US who opposed entry into the war were considered traitors. President Roosevelt at the time said, "There is a band of men in our midst who call themselves Americans, but who want to destroy America. They are trying to undermine democracy as much as the enemy," he said, denouncing opposition to the war as harmful to America. During the same period in Japan, Those who opposed the war or disagreed with the government's policies were also excluded from society as unpatriotic. In wartime, those who merely try to carefully learn the opinions of both sides before deciding on their own positions are often labeled as "you are on the enemy side," creating a society that has difficulty accepting different opinions. Once propaganda has progressed to this stage, there is little room left for raising dissenting voices or even questioning the war. How would you act in such an extreme situation? Would you maintain a calm perspective, not be swallowed up by the power of propaganda, and courageously raise your voice? The 10th principle poses such an ultimate question to us. It may be difficult to get a real sense of war only by hearing stories about wars of the past or wars in distant countries. However, there is one thing you should remember. That is, war propaganda starts not during the war, but it starts before the war starts. Compared to the days when the mass media used to monopolize information, we now have the powerful means of the internet. Since even individuals can transmit and disseminate information, it can be said that we now have the means to counter war propaganda. However, as information warfare has become more complex and the speed at which hoaxes and fake news spread has become quicker, there is a risk of becoming complicit in propaganda. Hatred of the enemy, a sense of justice, sympathy for the weak, these reactions are natural to us human beings. But we have reason as well as emotion. That is why we need to be able to make calm decisions rather than being driven by our emotions. In her book, The Basic Principles of War Propaganda, Anne Morelli states as follows: "I believe that even if excessive skepticism is dangerous, it is less likely to lead to tragic consequences than blind trust. The media surround us on a daily basis, and once international conflicts, ideological confrontations, or social conflicts arise, they come into our homes in an attempt to get us to agree to fight. The best way to deal with these poisons is to question everything at first." Now that we have looked at the big picture of war propaganda in 2 videos, what are your thoughts? Please share your opinions in the comment section. In Kanta's channel, I try to bring you the perspectives you need to see things from multiple perspectives. Your ability to make calm judgments may lead to the power to bring peace to the world, albeit indirectly. Each of us may be small, but we are not powerless. If we can gather our small power, we may become a big driving force to change the world. Those of you who would continue learning with me, Kanta, please take this opportunity to subscribe to my channel if you have not yet done so. If you felt that you learned even a little bit from this video, I would appreciate it if you could click the like button at the end. Thank you again for watching to the end. See you again in the next video.